Miranda Reeves stepped through the automatic doors of the base commissary with a quiet kind of purpose. Her jacket, once olive green, now faded to a dusty tan, hung loosely over her shoulders. The sleeves were frayed, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. It looked like something pulled out of a thrift store bin, and to two young officers standing nearby, it was a source of amusement. They leaned in, pretending to scan energy drinks on the shelf while muttering just loud enough for others to hear. One of them smirked and said that the jacket must have survived a few wars of its own. The other chuckled, adding that it probably came with a free can of soup. Their voices were light, full of sarcasm, unaware of the weight their words were brushing against. Miranda didn't turn. Her eyes stayed fixed on the shelf in front of her as she reached for a box of crackers. Fingers steady, but deliberate. Her posture didn't change, but her shoulders set square and disciplined, held still in a way that suggested she'd heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Behind her silence was a presence they didn't recognize, the kind that didn't ask for respect, but had earned it 1,000 times over. The kind that could stand alone in a room full of uniforms and still feel more soldier than any of them. As the officers passed her, still chuckling, one of them made a show of nodding toward her jacket. "Nice vintage," he said. "Real, authentic." Miranda kept walking her grocery basket light in her hand, her limp subtle but noticeable with each step. The past didn't weigh her down, it moved with her. Every quiet step was proof. At 55, Miranda carried herself like someone used to standing alone. Her walk was steady, though her right leg dragged just slightly. It was the kind of injury that never fully healed, but no longer needed explanation. Her back was straight, the result of years spent under orders, and her hair silver and pulled into a bun was as practical as the list she carried in her pocket. She lived in a small house just off base, tucked behind a row of older townhomes meant for retired personnel. It was quiet there. No pictures on the porch, no welcome mat. Just a clean walkway and a mailbox with her name, the paint faded. She didn't decorate. She didn't invite people in. Her world was small, deliberate, and hers alone. Every morning she rose before dawn, not because she had to, but because she always had. She moved through routine like clockwork coffee news lights, stretching for the shoulder that ached every cold morning. The VA had denied her claim again last month. Same reason as before. Service not confirmed. Records not found. But Miranda didn't raise her voice. She filed another appeal, folded her papers neatly, and scheduled the next meeting. Some mornings she opened the worn metal box tucked in her closet. Inside a photo. 5 figures in desert camo faces, half-shadowed by gear, standing in front of a helicopter without markings. The edges of the picture were soft now. One of the men had scribbled initials on the back, just enough for those who knew to understand. She was the only one left. Miranda didn't tell people about the missions. Most wouldn't believe her anyway. Spectre Group was never listed in base archives. No unit badge. No formal debriefings. They moved under triple-blind protocols, identities shielded even from their own chain of command. She didn't need anyone's gratitude. But when her shoulder cracked reaching for a can, or her knee flared up after too long standing in line, the silence grew heavier. At the commissary, she noticed the looks sometimes, the polite stares, the whispered questions. Who was the woman in the ragged jacket? Where did she come from? She never answered, because the truth wasn't hers to give, at least not yet. Miranda stepped into the customer service line with the same quiet resolve she brought to everything. She carried a thin folder tucked under her arm, the corners worn from too many appeals. Ahead of her, families juggled toddlers and grocery bags. Behind her, 2 lieutenants from earlier had settled into a lazy stance, still snickering now and then. When her turn came, she approached the counter and handed over her military ID. The young clerk smiled politely and asked if she was active duty or a dependent. Veteran Miranda said without hesitation. The girl paused. "I'll need to see your DD-214, she replied. Miranda nodded and opened the folder. Inside were several letters from the Department of Defense. Formal. Stamped. Signed. But none of them were standard. They explained her situation in carefully crafted language. Her records, they stated, were classified beyond routine access due to national security. The clerk frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We need standard documentation." Behind her, one of the lieutenants muttered something about people faking military service for discounts. Miranda heard it. So did everyone in line. A couple of customers chuckled nervously. The clerk looked unsure. Miranda kept her voice calm. "This is what I have. The VA sent me here to verify my address for medical approval." The girl looked over her shoulder, clearly stalling. "Let me get a supervisor." Miranda waited. Her folder rested on the counter like a quiet challenge. The two lieutenants had moved closer now, pretending to check out nearby. One of them leaned over to his friend. "Classic stolen valor," he said louder this time. "Bet she's here for free meds." When the supervisor arrived, she glanced over the documents with brisk efficiency. "I'm sorry," she said. "These aren't acceptable forms of verification." "We need your DD-24 tour," Miranda replied evenly. "That document does not exist in open records. My missions were classified." The supervisor nodded, uncomfortable. "Then I can't update your file." Behind her, the laughter picked up again. Some people will claim anything one of the lieutenants said. Miranda felt the familiar pressure building in her chest. Not rage, not even shame. Just that old frustration. The kind you swallow so often it becomes muscle memory. She closed the folder, thanked the clerk, and turned. But the room had started to shift. As Miranda turned from the counter, balancing her groceries in one arm, the automatic doors opened behind her. A breeze followed the entrance of a man in full uniform, flanked by two aides. General Marcus Harris, 4 stars on each shoulder. His steps were confident, his voice crisp as he read from a tablet. He didn't notice her at first. She instinctively stepped aside to make room. Head down, just another civilian in his path. But then he looked up. His gaze passed over her face, then dropped to the worn area above her heart. The faded patch. Almost invisible. Almost. He froze mid-stride. The aides stopped 2 steps later, confused by the sudden halt. The general's eyes stayed fixed. The room seemed to quiet itself. Without a word, without hesitation, General Harris stood tall and raised his right hand in a perfect military salute. Everything stopped. Cashiers paused mid-scan. Customers turned. Even the lieutenants froze in place. Miranda didn't move. For a long breath, she just stood there, eyes locked with his. Then she shifted her groceries to her left arm and slowly returned the salute. Her movements were precise, controlled, the way they'd once been on missions no one ever spoke of. "Captain Reeves," the general said. "Spectre Group. Tyran 03. His voice was clear, loud enough for those nearby to hear. It wasn't a question. It was confirmation. "Yes, sir," Miranda replied, her voice steady now. Around them, the silence deepened. The general lowered his hand. So did she. A weight lifted in that commissary, but it wasn't hers. It was theirs. The customers. The staff. The officers who judged her by an old jacket. The lieutenants stood stunned, faces pale. They had laughed at a hero. General Harris turned to his aides. "Wait for me outside." His tone was not to be questioned. The 2 aides obeyed without a word, glancing once more at Miranda, before disappearing through the doors. He looked back at her. "You saved my team," he said quietly. "Your unit got us out when everything else failed." Miranda nodded. 3 helicopters down. Dust storm rolling in. They'd created a corridor under fire, giving 32 men, including him, a way out. "Only 3 of us made it back, sir. I'm the last." The general blinked once, just once. Then he gestured toward the small coffee area near the front. "Would you sit with me?" Captain Miranda followed him, her steps still favoring the right leg. The aisle cleared for them like water around a stone. The general waited until they were seated with coffee before he spoke again. The cup felt warm in Miranda's hands, grounding her in the strangeness of the moment. For 20 years, she had never expected this day to come. "I've tried for years to find out what happened to your team," General Harris said. "After the debriefing, everything disappeared into files I couldn't access. Miranda gave a small nod. That was by design. Triple-blind protocol. Even our own chain of command didn't know we existed. You were ghosts, he said. Ghosts that saved lives. She sipped her coffee, letting silence fill the space between them. Then the general pulled out his phone. With calm precision, he made a call. This is General Harris. I need immediate declassification of personnel files relating to Spectre Group, specifically Tyrant Extraction 2003, Priority 1. Miranda didn't speak. She'd been down this road before. Promises, approvals, delays. But something in his tone was different. Final. He rattled off an authorization code, the kind that didn't get questioned. Bureaucracy moves slow, he said, pocketing the phone, but it moves faster when I push. Thank you, sir. Her voice was quieter now. This wasn't just about her leg or shoulder. This was about recognition, truth, dignity. Just then, the two lieutenants approached. Their posture was stiff, their expressions unreadable. Sir One said permission to speak. The general glanced at Miranda. She gave a tiny nod. Granted, the general replied. The taller lieutenant stepped forward. Ma'am, I want to apologize for the way we treated you earlier. We had no right. The second added, we acted disrespectfully and there's no excuse. We judged by appearance, not knowing what stood in front of us. Miranda looked at them for a long moment. She saw more than shame. She saw potential. You couldn't have known, she said finally. That was the point. We operated in shadows so others could work in the light. But that doesn't excuse us, the lieutenant said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But now you've learned. That's what matters. The general dismissed them and they left without protest. Around the commissary, heads turned back toward groceries, but the atmosphere had changed. Quiet respect had replaced mockery. No one would laugh at her jacket again. 3 months later, Miranda walked into the same commissary. The jacket she wore had been cleaned and carefully restored. The patch above her heart had been restitched. Below it, a small ribbon glinted quietly, a presidential unit citation newly awarded. Her limp had eased. Physical therapy had started the week after the declassification order was processed. Benefits approved. Claims unlocked. Things that once took years now took days. She no longer felt invisible. As she picked up a shopping basket, a familiar voice called from customer service. Good morning, Captain Reeves. Alicia, the clerk from that day, smiled with nervous warmth. Miranda nodded. Good morning. Their interactions now came with a new rhythm, respectful, human. Down the canned goods aisle, she saw one of the lieutenants from before, alone, focused. He looked up and froze. His face went from startled to resolved. He approached carefully. Captain Reeves, I just wanted to tell you something. Miranda waited, basket in hand. Your case is now part of our officer training program. General Harris made sure of it. They don't reveal the mission details, of course. But they use your story to teach us about judgment, about humility. Miranda raised an eyebrow. I didn't expect that. The lieutenant nodded. I've taken the lesson personally. I had to. I failed once. I won't again. We all learn from experience, Miranda said. Some of the best lessons come from our worst moments. The lieutenant straightened. Thank you for your service, Captain. Both then and now. As he walked away, Miranda felt something shift. Not just in him, but in her. At checkout, the same master sergeant scanned her items. He glanced at the restored patch. Looks like people finally know what that means. Miranda smiled. They don't know everything, but enough. That's what counts, he said. You earned it. Outside, the sun caught the edge of her citation as she walked back to her car. New soldiers passed and straightened slightly as they saw her. The reaction had changed. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was recognition. Even if they didn't know the full story, they knew enough to understand that this woman had done something worth standing for. A week before the ceremony, General Harris called Miranda personally. They had located the daughter of Specialist Rodriguez. With the partial declassification now official, his Silver Star would finally be awarded. The general wanted Miranda there. "You're the last one left," he said. It would mean something. Miranda sat in silence after the call, staring at the patch on her jacket. It had belonged to Major Callahan. He never came back from Tiran. Only his jacket had. And now, after all these years, she would stand in front of his comrade's child and hand her the truth he died to protect. The day of the ceremony was crisp and clear. Fort Braxton held a small outdoor service on the east field, where flags flew high and the breeze carried the weight of memory. Rows of chairs were set, not too formal, but dignified. Miranda arrived early, dressed in the same jacket, but this time everything on it had meaning again. Her name was printed on the program: Captain Miranda Reeves, Spectre Group, last surviving member. As the guests settled in, General Harris approached. "You look good in that jacket," he said. "Always did." Miranda smiled faintly. "It belongs to someone who earned it more than me." The general shook his head. "You both did." They took their seats as the program began. A chaplain spoke of honor. A senior officer spoke of duty. Then it was Miranda's turn. She stepped up to the podium, the folded medal in her hand. Her speech was short, direct. "There are stories we were never meant to tell," she began. "But some sacrifices deserve to be known, even if not fully understood. Specialist Rodriguez was one of 6 who went into Tiran that night. He didn't make it out. He stayed behind to keep our comms live so the others could escape. His daughter, now 26, came forward." Miranda placed the medal into her hands. "He died a hero," Miranda said. "That's not a story. That's a fact." The young woman choked back tears. "Thank you for remembering." After the ceremony, families gathered, speaking softly. Veterans approached Miranda not to ask questions, but to nod in quiet acknowledgement. Not everyone knew the full story, but everyone now knew enough to feel it mattered. Later, as the sun dipped below the base buildings, Miranda stood alone near the flagpole. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and grass. She thought of Major Callahan, of Rodriguez, of Way, of Decker, all gone, but never lost. For the first time, her service had a place, not in shadow, not fully in light, but in something real, recognized, remembered. Miranda stood at the front of the classroom facing a group of young recruits in crisp uniforms. Their eyes were sharp, posture straight. Some had heard rumors. Most didn't know what to expect. A war story, a tactical breakdown. What they got was something quieter, deeper. "I'm not here to talk about heroism," she began. "I'm here to talk about judgment, about what it costs when we see a person and assume we know their worth." She paced slowly, one hand resting on the back of a chair. "Years ago, I walked into a commissary wearing this jacket." She gestured to her faded uniform. 2 officers mocked me, thought I was a poser, a fake. I didn't respond. Not then. You see, I didn't wear this to prove anything. I wore it because it belonged to someone who never came home. She let the silence settle in, then continued. "My unit never had a badge. No public records. We operated in places maps didn't mark. And we kept our mouths shut. Most of them sat completely still now, not blinking, not breathing too loud. But there's one thing I learned over and over again. When you're leading people, whether it's a team of 6 or a platoon of 60, you better learn to look deeper than appearance. You better learn fast." She paused again, then softened. "I'm not proud of being invisible, but I'm proud of what we did. And if any part of my story can stop one of you from dismissing the wrong person, then it's worth sharing." In the back row, a young woman nodded. Another scribbled something in his notebook. Miranda caught it all. That was why she had come. Not for applause, not for credit, but for something that might outlive her, the lesson. As the class ended, an instructor walked over. "Thank you, Captain." They needed to hear that. Miranda looked at the door where daylight streamed in. So did I. Miranda walked out of the training building, the late morning sun casting soft light across the parade ground. Her steps were steady, her limp barely noticeable. She had just spoken to a room full of young soldiers about silence duty and the power of perspective. Now, as she headed back toward the parking lot, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She passed a small group of enlisted troops standing near the path. When they saw her, they straightened instinctively. Not in fear or by order, out of something more honest, respect. Their eyes flicked to the patch on her jacket, now fully restored. A symbol that once meant nothing to most now carried quiet authority. Miranda offered a nod. Nothing grand. Just enough to acknowledge their gesture. As she continued walking, she caught a glimpse of herself in a car window. The woman looking back stood taller than she remembered. The lines on her face hadn't disappeared. The silver in her hair hadn't faded. But something else had changed. She looked certain, present, whole. In the distance, the flag at headquarters fluttered against the blue sky. Miranda paused beside her car, resting one hand on the roof. For years, her world had been shaped by what she couldn't say, couldn't prove, couldn't show. But now, even if the missions would always remain behind redacted lines, the people in them had names, and those names had weight. She opened the trunk and placed her small bag of groceries inside. Then she paused, fingers lingering on the edge. Her thoughts drifted not to war stories or medals, but to voices, laughter in a dusty tent, code names whispered over radio static, a joke from Decker that still made her smile. Callahan's final order, calm, even as everything collapsed around them. They were gone. But she wasn't alone anymore. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lieutenant Mercer, the young officer from intelligence training, the one who had asked if Miranda would return for a Q&A next month. The message was short. "We'd be honored to have you back." Miranda smiled as she started the engine. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. She drove slowly past the same soldiers who had stood at attention. This time, one of them gave her a small wave. Not out of protocol, out of recognition. She returned it with a quiet raise of her fingers and turned out of the lot. There would be more mornings like this, more questions, more rooms filled with young faces eager to learn. And Miranda was ready. After years in the shadows, she had found her place in the light. Not all of it, just enough. Enough to be seen, enough to be remembered, enough to finally speak.